Hello, everyone. We're live with our International Leftist Coalition. I'm so happy to be back. We had a week off, and here we are. Here we are, ready to set fire to all the hypocrisy in the world. It's international. I'm so happy to be back here, and I have Nick with me. How are you doing, Nick?
Always good to be back, Josana. I had a pretty busy schedule. I mean, this is good. I love the new direction of this network. So, International Leftist Coalition. This is the time for Josana to shine, and we got a great show today. So, I'm looking forward to it. I'm just here to support as always. So, good to be here.
Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Also, we have our beloved Kareem. How are you doing, Kareem? How are you today? So happy to have you here with us.
Thank you. Glad to be back. Glad to be back. We had a 1 week break, so I was missing you guys already, but I'm sure we're going to have a great talk today.
Yes. Thank you. And we have my beautiful and beloved Asol. Thank you so much for being here. It's always a pleasure to have you. How are you?
I am doing great. And as always, thank you for having me and for creating this platform.
Awesome. And tonight we have a very special friend, Malik. How are you, my friend? Thank you so much for being here. Malik is it's 2 a.m. where you are right now, right?
Yeah, it is. It is. But I'm a bit of a vampire, I'm awake in the night and I sleep in the day. So
Awesome. Awesome. We have an African vampire here with us tonight. I like it. I love it. Well, let's get started. Let's talk about the fact that we have a threat posed to us, America, people. Iran is almost, has almost built a nuclear weapon. Asal, could you tell us about that, please? I'm very threatened by it.
So, I mean, there's so much we could talk about. There's so much we could unpack, but just very briefly, obviously right now you have the resumption of negotiations between Iran and the parties to the Iran nuclear deal, the 2015 JCPOA, which is also called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. That's the acronym. The parties to the deal does not include the United States because, of course, under the Trump administration, the United States withdrew from the deal in 2018. And so now we see under this new administration, the Biden administration, a resumption of negotiations, what we thought was going to be, hopefully a very swift return and restoration of the deal where both parties, Iran and the United States, return to compliance. Now, the idea of the threat of Iran on its face has just been something that's constantly been played up for several decades in the United States, specifically the nuclear threat of Iran. I mean, you have news clips and commentary going back. I thought it was to the 90s. I was recently told out. No, it goes all the way back to the 80s. That Iran is a nuclear threat. The idea that it's been sort of on the brink of a weapon, that brink has been decades long, right? So it's Iran should have, by the narrative that's been posed from opponents of its nuclear program, its civilian nuclear program, it should have had a bomb decades ago, and it doesn't. For several reasons. Number one, Iran is a signatory to the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which basically allows states to have nuclear programs, but not nuclear weapons. Right. So nuclear technology has other applications. I actually just recently saw an Iranian doctor who specializes in nuclear medicine talking about the applications of nuclear technology within the fields of medicine. So there are other applications to it. But we've been and when I say we, I mean the United States, and I mean by extension the international community under the sort of pressure of the United States, has been obsessed with this idea that Iran poses a nuclear threat. And so you hear things in the media like Iran's breakout time. They never really explain what any of that means, right? So when you say breakout time, it makes people think like, oh, Iran's going to have a bomb in a month. Here's the thing. That's not true. So the question of breakout time means that Iran would be able to produce the amount of nuclear grade uranium that is necessary, the material that is necessary to create one bomb. Okay. This is, keep in mind, the two of the main countries that are feel threatened by this. One is the United States, which has thousands of bombs, and the other one is Israel, which has anywhere between 75 and 400 bombs. It would actually require many more steps before Iran could actually create a bomb or be able to use it in any way, even though there's no indication, none whatsoever, that that would be the case. That would take an additional, and this is according to nuclear experts, an additional, say, 2 years. But why the sense of urgency? Why are we never hear things like that in the media? Why is it that we're sort of in this position of it's a threat, it's a threat? Because we have to make an excuse for why we're in the situation that we're in currently. And really, the Biden admin, candidate Biden, for as far as his supporters and proponents of diplomacy and supporters of the deal were concerned, believed that he would make it a priority to restore the deal that his predecessor basically tore up. Why? Because Biden spent years criticizing, lambasting Trump for those decisions. And what's interesting is in recent weeks, what you see is even the people who actually put the pressure, sort of classic American hawks like Thomas Friedman and Max Boot, are saying pulling out of the deal was one of the worst foreign policy blunders in the last several decades in the United States. You have Israeli officials from the Netanyahu era saying that it was a huge mistake, and where we are right now is worse off for everyone involved, because of mistakes made by the United States. But ironically, even though we're saying the mistakes were made by the United States and that's why we're here, the onus is somehow still on Iran to rectify that, right? Like that's the issue at hand right now. And in the narrative that we hear, I think it was today or yesterday that the E3, that's Germany, Britain, and France, issued a statement about the current situation with the Iran nuclear talks. And I just want to quote this one part. It says, "For 2 years now, Iran has been taking unprecedented steps and recently accelerated the pace of most sensitive violations of the JCPOA." What's missing from that is the fact that it's 3 years now, not 2 years, but 3 years now that the United States is in violation of the JCPOA. But those things are always lacking from these statements. When you hear statements about Iran's nuclear program, when they say something about enriching to 20% or enriching to 60% uranium, what's often missing from that story is why those decisions were made. Iran made the decision to enrich to 20% in November of last year after Israel assassinated an Iranian scientist inside of Iran. Iran made the decision in April of this year to enrich at 60% after an attack on its nuclear facility, likely carried out by Israel, in Iran. So it's missing from the story is how we got here. It's just sort of now on Iran to figure out how to solve a problem that it did not create. And I want to let others have the chance to speak, because there's one thing that I didn't address in all of this. Everything I'm saying is through the lens that the US presents in terms of how to deal with Iran. No one even questions the premise. No one questions the premise of how do we logically decide that countries that have nuclear weapons can dictate what other countries have or do not have? How do we make that decision? If it's decided on the fact that one country is, quote, dangerous, wouldn't we be considered the most dangerous country in the world, considering the amount of wars we have carried out, the amount of bombs we have dropped in the region every single day for decades? The fact that we're starving people in the region with sanctions, people that we claim to want to help, right? For instance, people in Afghanistan, right? We went to war in Afghanistan for 20 years to help the Afghan people. Now we're helping starve up to 23 million. So there's all these questions that lead to the premise of why we're even discussing Iran's nuclear program as being this grave threat when there's a regional neighbor, Israel, that has nuclear weapons, and no one questions why. No one even acknowledges that those weapons exist. Why does Iran have to submit to inspections while Israel has to submit to none? And as long as we have these double standards, it doesn't make the notion of an international sort of system, rules-based order, international law, none of those have meaning as long as we're not even asking these basic questions.
I've been talking about this with Assad for a while, and one thing that always stand out to me is the hypocrisy as Assad laid out. And me and Josana, we always like to make the Israel connection because Israel is a nuclear power, right? And the United States support them, continue to fund them more money. And I want to share you guys this. I want to share this. This was a few days ago. I see the Gray Zone wrote this. Let me close this up. Israel killed up to 192 Palestinian civilians in May 2021 attacks on Gaza. More than 70% of Israeli attacks that killed civilians in Gaza had no corresponding reports of militants hit alongside them. What is the narrative that come out from neocons? I'm talking about from both parties. That Iran is this unique threat that we got to sanction and start our people. We got to have zero tolerance, no tolerance negotiations with them. And that's what the Biden administration is mostly doing, just like Trump. No tolerance, continuing the sanctions. When Iran, they was like, we want to be compliant. They was compliant even in the midst of U.S. aggression. So, but this is okay. It's okay to continue to arm Israel. It's okay for Israel to have nukes, but we do everything we can, even at the destruction of human life, to stop Iran from having nukes. I want to bring that point. I toss it back to the panel. I have a few more things to share just to highlight the hypocrisy of this. But I toss it back to the panel.
It's mask off, right? It's mask off moment for the U.S. government, and to watch it every day is I mean, it's sad, but something as a foreigner I already knew, like us, that are outsiders of the US. We already knew all those things, right? We never believed in an American hero. There was never a good president in this country for the rest of the world. And it's mask off moment for this government because so now it's clear who is the one that's dictating the war rules and who can have power, weaponry power, Balic power, and who cannot. So I want to pass to Karim and then Malik, or the other way around, and back to Asaf.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. I think one of the worst things is just the tremendous hypocrisy. I mean, U.S. allies have weapons of mass destruction and nuclear weapons, and that is somehow not a problem. But when the enemies of the U.S. have weapons of mass destruction, then it's a problem. And I have a kind of flashback, when it comes to Iran. This whole focus on the bomb, the nuclear weapon. You saw the same thing actually happening with Iraq back in the day. Weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, until the moment that people really started to believe in it, and you got this intervention in Iraq. So I see the same thing happening here. It's just not working as well. It takes very long. And I have a question for Asal, which I want to ask. But before I ask, I also think there's another thing we need to start doing. And I saw that Asal is doing that just like me. I do it too when I talk about the Dutch government, for example. We have the tendency, all of us, I mean, I think Nick does it as well, to say, we have been pushing sanction on Iran. We have done this. Why are we doing this? We don't care about Israel, and we don't care about Israel's nuclear weapon. Why do we always say we? You know what I mean? We tend to internalize the behaviors of the capitalist, warmongering, imperialist elites as if it is us. Just because we are born within these borders, we start to talk in we terms. You know what I mean? And I think it's very important also psychologically for us to start distancing ourselves from the behavior of our rulers, you could say. Instead of saying we have been putting sanctions on that country, we have been putting sanctions on, why don't we just start saying they? They are putting sanctions on these countries. They don't care about Israel's nuclear weapons. This may sound very, very, very simple, but I think it's really important for us to start externalizing the behavior of these monsters. You know what I mean? That is number one. Number two is the question that I have for Assad. So you see now already for many, many years that Iran somehow seems to be like this big, big boogeyman in the eyes of the United States. this nonsense about bombs, okay, the nuclear bomb. I heard it already when I was a child. I mean, you become tired of it. What I want to ask you, Asal, and maybe you can give an answer. Probably it's very difficult to give an answer, just 1, 2, 3 in this show. What do you think is the core reason why the U.S. and Israel are just so obsessed and fixated with Iran? And my question is does it have to do with trade routes? Does it have to do with the political with refusal to cooperate on political levels or geopolitical levels? What do you think is the real core reason that they just cannot stand Iran? You know, I mean, there are many governments that are a bit ambivalent towards the United States, but somehow Iran is like such a big boogeyman in the eyes of the US. And I want to know what would be one of the core reasons you think that Iran is such an obsession.
So I'm going to say something that some people might find odd. But honestly, I think when it comes to the United States and the US position on Iran, one of the core reasons is racism. And that might sound odd, but the reality of it is the way that the US approaches Iran is ideological. It's fanatic, it's zealous. It's not rational. It's not built on this idea. I mean, if we wanted to approach Iran rationally, we would just, restoring something like the nuclear deal would be quite easy. The reason you can't, the reason why even the Biden administration had a challenge doing it, and this is something that's said within Biden supporters and within circles in DC, is that, it takes a lot of political courage. Why? Because it takes political courage to do anything that's not belligerently aggressive against Iran. Even Biden has not lifted sanctions. The U.S. is still not in the deal. The negotiations so far have not gone very far. And yet you have Republicans in this country flat out lying and saying, look at all these Biden concessions to Iran. He's lifted all the sanctions. That's not, it's so difficult sometimes to deal with the discourse on Iran because there's so much disinformation. There's so much blatant lies that no one holds accountable. Like, that's what I don't understand where the media is, where journalists are to step in and be like, actually, no. Biden has not lifted those sanctions. When Iran's nuclear program is referred to as a nuclear weapons program in op-eds and things like that, that is incorrect. That is a misnomer of the way that you are describing something. And yet these things constantly happen. Iran is it's not just a nuclear issue, right? If you want to look at the US, obviously the watershed moment, what makes Iran the villain, is the embassy seizure of 1979. When the U.S. embassy is seized in Tehran in 1979, you have 444 days of nonstop images coming from Iran that are obviously terrible because you have 52 Americans held hostage there. Now, if you wanted to create historical context onto why something like that happened, no excuse for why it happened, but why in fact it did happen. And the reason I say why it's important to know those things is because that's how you learn. You learn by knowing the history behind things, and then by understanding how you deal with, adversaries, friends, whatever, however you want to describe things. But the reasoning, one of the central reasons behind the embassy seizure was the 1953 coup that the United States carried out, right? The US and the UK carried out a coup, removed Iran's popular prime minister and reinstated a dictator king. This is something that happened historically. And the fear of that embassy being used again, because this is where it happened, this is where that plot unfolded, was from the US embassy. The fear of that occurring again in November of 1979, because the Shah had been allowed into the US 2 weeks earlier, is what pushed a lot of Iranian revolutionary students to seize the embassy. Again, and I cannot reiterate this enough, the action was wrong. Why was the action wrong, in my opinion? Because I actually do believe in international law, even though the United States doesn't. I do. And so you have, sovereign soil. Now, it is ironic that the US cares about sovereign soil when all we do is invade it and bomb it. But when it's our own sovereign soil, it becomes extremely important. So Iran becomes the villain, and that's it. And that's basically like the end of the story. The fact that that happened now 42 years ago you might think like, oh, that's not, I mean, I'm sure that's not part of the American psyche anymore. How about the fact that in January of 2020, after the United States illegally assassinated an Iranian general, the president of the United States at the time, Donald Trump, said that he would target 52 Iranian cultural sites. Now let's forget the fact that that's a war crime, right? Like you're not actually supposed to attack civilian or cultural sites. But why did he pick the number 52 for the number of hostages from 1979? So you see that this is still part of that psyche. And the thing is both states have mutual grievances. Iran has grievances that it can lay out as well. But how do we get past them so that we don't find ourselves in the position we are now, which is, and I think it's so important, Kareem, that you brought up Iraq in 2003 and WMDs. How do we get out of the cycle that we are in now, which is basically a repetition of what led up to the invasion of Iraq in 2003? Is that we acknowledge the mutual grievances, we stop looking at any state, any group of people as this villainous cartoon, and we actually see that their actions are rooted in their own experiences. And just like right now, we don't contextualize anything. It's just, hey, why is Iran accelerating its nuclear program? Well, let's look why. Because it's been attacked, sabotaged, bombed, assassinated, it sanctioned. Iran abided by the deal, the US violated it, but none of that is part of the context. It's just Iran is evil. That's why they're doing this. And so this is the continuous problem. The core reason, in my view, is that Iran has been vilified to a cartoonish caricature of villainy. And it's so difficult to get around it unless you address that issue, unless you address the fact that, yes, part of what is informing our ideas are ideological fanaticism that sees them as an enemy no matter what. So the people in the US, many of the politicians who are opposed to the nuclear deal aren't opposed to the deal. They are opposed to diplomacy with Iran, period. They want Iran to be an adversary. They want it to be an enemy. And that falls into, I mean, if you want to get further into it, obviously, Islamophobic tropes play into it as well. You can't separate the fact that it is a Muslim country. But geopolitically, just to add to this, Iran also poses a challenge to the notion of US empire, whereas other states in the region do not pose a challenge to it. They embrace it because they benefit from it. So if it's Saudi Arabia or if it's Israel, they're like, well, this is great because we reap the benefits of US empire. Iran challenges that, and by doing so, makes itself an enemy of US interests as well.
Yeah, no, well said, and I think you make a good point there. And also, one of the people in the comments section who said that it's Orientalism, huh? And that Orientalism plays a huge role. And we talked about it for people in your audience. Go back maybe 3 weeks. We talked about European racism and Orientalism. Very good show, in my opinion. And what here you can see, I think, also the result of decades and decades of Orientalist propaganda in the news, in the media, in the Hollywood movies, what we talked about, which has systematically demonized people from the Middle East to such an extent that most people, at least in the West, or a lot of people in the West, really don't give a damn about people in the Middle East and easily believe that there is some kind of axis of evil. You know what I mean? That systematic propaganda has such a powerful effect. I just cannot understate it. Yeah, Nick, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was trying to think of that guy.
I also want to get
is another one. I also want to get Malik in here as well. But I want to quickly make a point. What's the name of that guy who he's always on Bill Maher and he like extremely Islamophobic? But Bill Maher, he did the same thing. He always justified U.S. imperialism in the Middle East by somehow saying that it's the Muslims. It's their ideology that is bad. So somehow we gotta go in there and bomb and kill their civilians to show the world how evil their ideology is. Do you guys see how that doesn't make sense? What's that guy name? Do you got? I'm blanking on the academic name. I'll probably remember here soon, but I want to get my conversation. Sam Harris. I remember at the last second. Sam Harris is one of those guys who is deemed as intellectual, and he always argues that U.S. Western values is somehow inherently superior than anyone else's. Like if you look at Arabs and other countries, and this is ruined in Orientalism, right? Because his argument was that Muslims are somehow extremely violent. Well, last time I checked, it wasn't Muslims that destabilized the Middle East and killed 2.5 million Iraqis, right? 2.5, yeah. So it wasn't them that started the Atlantic slave trade that destroyed my community. It wasn't them that is responsible for imprisoning 25% of the world's prison population. Do you see how people like Sam Harris refuse to acknowledge the crimes of our culture, and they want to paint other people as being the evil ones, and that's how imperialists and neocons pull off the wars. But anyway, that's a whole topic for another day. But I want to get Malik in here as well. Any thoughts on the general topic, Rand? Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I really like the discussion about like racism and Orientalism. I think white supremacy is definitely playing a huge role here, and it makes me think about how like apartheid South Africa was allowed to have nuclear weapons, whereas the rest of the continent couldn't have nuclear weapons, and that's just another example of a nation that's deemed to be white, right, or accepted as white or close to whiteness, and therefore they can have nuclear weapons, whereas it becomes a problem when other nations go for the same thing. But I have a question, because obviously Iran is a Shia country, and if you look at like Pakistan, they also have nuclear weapons, and that's a majority Sunni country. I wonder if that antagonism between the US and Iran is based on their faith, right? Because Saudi Arabia, another majority Sunni country, and if you look at all the Gulf states that are Sunni, they seem to be allies of the US, or accepted as friendly, whereas Shiite nations tend to be on the bad side of the United States' foreign policy. So I wonder if maybe that's a dynamic there that's playing some sort of role.
Kareem, do you want to take that, or do you want me to go?
Please, Asal, go ahead.
I mean, my base response would be you're giving a lot of credit to the US to understanding the nuances and differences of Islamic sects, right? Like that's expecting a lot from them to actually know what the difference of any of those are. The reality of it is the vast majority of the Muslim world is Sunni, right? The Shiites represent a small minority. Iran, for its own, and we won't get into this, even though I'm itching to get into the entire story, but Iran has a very specific historical trajectory that starts 500 years ago and lays it and makes it become a Shiite majority country. Whereas, like I said, the vast majority of the Muslim world is Sunni. So I don't think it's a doctrinal difference, if that makes sense. And I mean, if anything, a lot of the sort of Islamophobic tropes that come from terrorism that is carried out are actually rooted in Sunni-led groups, right? So that happens a lot more, which makes sense also because it's, again, the majority. It is the majority sect of the religion. So I wouldn't pay a lot of heed to the U.S. reasoning being through a sort of sectarian lens. But something interesting that does bring up is sometimes that sectarianism is played up by the U.S. side as if to sort of paint this picture that, Muslims have always just been fighting each other this whole time. That's the problem. And it's like, no, again, there's a strong history behind it. But for instance, if you look at the state of Iraq, the contemporary state of Iraq, which has existed for about 100 years, Iraq used to be part of the Ottoman Empire, which existed for 600 years. And under the Ottoman Empire, those were three separate provinces, where basically you had, if you were part of a different religious sect or religion, you could have your own courts and your own legal systems, right? So this is how the Ottomans sort of separated people out and allowed them some form of autonomy. And these groups existed next to each other for centuries. But when contemporary nation states and nationalisms and then internal sort of political dynamics took over, that's when you actually see the rise of a lot of these, quote, sectarian issues. So to paint a picture of this is like a 1400-year-old conflict between religions and completely, again, removing the role of colonialism, especially more than anything else, from how we get to where we are now, is historically inaccurate.
I have the, if I think this is a good. I want to show this video because I think this is on topic because this is actually something that I mentioned before. I want to show you guys how even people who are considered like liberals are guilty of pushing Oriental, uh, like racism and Islamophobia in order to justify wars. And this is one of my favorite clips. Right. This is actually when Glenn Greenwald, right? Because he actually wanted to build Marsh a show, and they had a conversation about this. And I want to play this clip, and I want to get you guys' reaction because this was a systematic beatdown of the Sam Harris, Bill Maher ideology. So I'm gonna mute my mic, and then we'll play.
It's not our fault what came out. We didn't go into Egypt.
Well,
we
did.
wound up with the Muslim
We didn't go
Brotherhood.
into Egypt. We were supporting and propping up Mubarak.
Man, so strong. Oh man, I love Glenn Greenwald there.
That is one of my favorite political clips ever. Like Bill Maher got dismantled, and you see how uncomfortable that Joanne Reed, Bill Maher is made by this conversation. And I'll pass it to the panel. I won't give you guys thoughts. But the question I leave you guys: why is Bill Maher so obsessed with defending U.S. imperialism in our state? What is that? What is this need from the liberal culture that people consider to be our allies, who I don't, and people get upset when I say these people are the enemy? That ideology that he pointed out, that is the ideology of the enemy, not the moderate. Are we clear here? Because he is using the idea that our society is better to justify our genocide of their state. And he brought up, oh, Christianity is better than Islam because our violence is not even recent. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I remember when George W. Bush Jr., one of the reasons why he said he invaded Iraq because he got a message from God. It was a message from God that he received, and he said, I'm going to invade Iraq because of that, because this is a holy mandate. This is what Rush Limbaugh was saying. This is the deal with the messaging. I actually remember this stuff. I was a teenager. Go ahead, Kareem.
No, even worse, George Bush called it crusades. George Bush called it a crusade. I kid you not.
But Bill Maher, the guy who said he's against George W. Bush, you see how he whitewashed that from history? He said Christianity is not recent. That is recent. That's millions of people. Guantanamo Bay is one of the strongest examples of human rights abuses in modern human history. If you look at the torture that went on in Guantanamo and the people who was proven innocent, these people, they would, just to give you guys an example, they will make these people, they will take them, they will be naked. They will pin them to a solid concrete floor that is cold, and they will use that to negotiate with them. These people that are innocent, and there have been examples of people freezing to death because our United States pinned these people to the ground. There was examples of people being annually raped by our government. Annually raped. They were force-feeding people. I'm not going to get graphic. Annually. But go ahead, Bill Maher, and tell us about the evils of the other. Anyone want to add on before I get too upset?
Yeah, I wanted to say it's just classic liberals, right? Like that I think their entire existence is built upon this violence, right? Like they like to perhaps ignore it, they like to pretend that it's not true, but for America to be where it is, I mean, first you needed the initial colonial genocides against Native Americans. You needed slavery. You need empire. You need neo-empire. You need imperialism. You need all of this thing, all of these things happening all around the world. And what I respect about Republicans is that at least they accept it. They admit it. They're not trying to lie to you. You know what I mean? Like they see what it like. They're not trying to hide it. They coat it in weird reasons like Bush and his crusades and that. But they're not like liberals. Like liberals and Democrats, my issue with them is that they pretend that they're trying to do the right thing. They pretend that they believe in democracy and human rights and all of these good things. But then when you see what they're actually doing around the world and what they're supporting around the world, it's contradictory, right? It is contradictory, and we have it in the UK too. I looked up on Google very quickly. Almost 40% of Democrats voted in favor of a resolution authorizing military force against Iraq. So that's a big part of the party, right? That's a big portion of the Democrats who are in favor of going to Iraq. So when this is your opposition, when you've got people who are in favor of the war due to their chauvinistic, white supremacist, racist reasons, and then you've got the opposition, half of whom are also in favor of doing the same thing, you're just kind of screwed, like you're in a country where both sides of the coin want the same thing, right? Their interests are aligned, and that's why I'm not surprised by his statement, but it's still annoying to see. It's still always infuriating when they pretend that they care about human rights and all of that stuff, but clearly they don't.
And to be clear, this is their ideology. But go ahead, Saul.
So it's interesting, this concept that the sort of like, I guess, Christian West, right, that sees itself as being secular in the post-Enlightenment and looks down and sort of denigrates the Muslim world because why are they still holding on to these like religious ideologies and bringing them into the political realm, which is what theocratic notions are. Except it's funny that those same Christian Western nations also got pissy every time there was a secular movement in those countries, because oftentimes the secularists talked about nationalism. They talked about, and what was that? What did that mean? That meant nationalizing their own resources. So, for instance, in Iran in 1953, Mossadegh was running a secular government. But when he tried to nationalize Iranian oil, in fact, when he succeeded in nationalizing Iranian oil, what happened? The Christian West stepped in and decided that he has to go. When Jamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt, since he brought up Egypt in the 1950s, learning from Mossadegh in Iran, decided to nationalize the Suez Canal. Again, Britain hated him, of course, because they are defying the power of the Christian West. So it's interesting that everything is always, it's so easy to play into this, it's Islam, but when there are secularists in power as well, these Western Christian powers take issue with it if those powers to be are actually trying to do things that defy Western hegemonic power. So and not to mention the fact, I think it was Glenn who said something in that clip about, if you've been bombing them for 60 years, the invasions, occupations, and absolute decimation of the region goes back far longer than 60 years. It's called colonialism. And so the fact that we completely extract these things as if everything is happening in a vacuum there, right? No one's reacting to anything. It's just, they're just like this naturally, organically. So you talk about a religion that's 1400 years old when its most extreme members, for instance, in Afghanistan, attack non-Islamic sites, right? When that happened in Afghanistan, everyone was like, oh, look, it's because of, or when ISIS does things like that, it's because, look at the religion. Those non-Islamic sites existed for 1400 years in Islamic territories. So it's not just the religion. It's the religion within a context, just like it would be the case with Judaism, just like it would be the case with Christianity. And the ironies of ironies is that when we talk about religion, I say this as someone who taught religious studies classes, and so it was fascinating to hear students in the US talk about religion. There are thousands of religions, dead religions, existing religions, and we just think religion means Abrahamic religions. Like, that's it. Religion means monotheistic Abrahamic religions. And that's our entire concept of religion. So it's the most fascinating thing to hear people who probably know extremely little about religion within this much broader spectrum of human history talk about it within this small frame of, Abrahamic religions, and the fact that those religions are extraordinarily similar, especially in their propensity for violence, because those threads of violence exist in all three of those Abrahamic religions. And yet, for some reason, none of that is ever considered. The fact that anti-Semitism, in its culmination of violence in the 20th century, became a genocide. Anti-Semitism wasn't created by Muslims. Anti-Semitism was created by Christians. But none of those things ever play a role in discussing, the Western secular world and how we talk about religion. It's just, backwards Muslims who apparently did nothing to advance human society at any given point in the last 1400 years.
The only thing I want to add to this, and I'll pass it back to Josana, is a lot of people don't think about, because the point you brought up was amazing. When people think about religion, they just think about the Western religions as well, right? And a lot of people don't understand that there has been countless. I mean, I might be underestimating the number, hundreds and hundreds of lost religions. And how was these religions lost? They were lost in crusades. And I mean, I'm talking about from all the entire spectrum. Look at the 5 most dominant religions. They all was complicit in one region or another at one time in history, in another, committing genocide against people who did not believe in the same religion as they do. So I want you guys to understand this. The reasons why we have the religions that we do, the reason why you're a Christian, the reason why my people are Christians, because they were taken from boats and they was forced to convert at the threat of death, right? So this is how their religion spread. So we have the 5 major religions because they won the war. they won the race of genocide, and that's honestly, if you look at human history, that's a large percentage of history. Our history is conquest, war, imposing religious domination on other people. That's why the new International Leftist Coalition, we got to start opposing this kind of stuff. When you actually read history, you see the primary struggles that we go through. Genocide after genocide, religions after religions. There have been countless libraries of human knowledge that have been lost, guys. That have been lost. The stuff you guys see that is written in the white man book, this white scientist discovered gravity because he said this: what goes up goes down. Like, other societies didn't know that, right? Other societies knew about astrology, right? And this is stuff we just know. Like, there is mountains and mountains of lost knowledge and time that's due to the Crusades. And once again, I know I'm more knowledgeable of Christian Crusades, but once again, I'm a little bit aware of stuff that like Hindus and Buddhists and what Islam was accomplished. So I just want to add that point. I'll pass it back to Josana and back to the panel.
Karimu, jump real quick, and then I get it. I talk.
Yeah, so I think that what you just said, Nick, is so important about the fact that that Bill Maher seems so incredibly uncomfortable when Glenn Greenwald goes against him saying that stuff. Don't forget that the Western media system, and I include Europe there, that for people like Bill Maher and other famous names, this bashing of other people who are classified as non-white most often, non-Westerners, and in this case Muslims, they've always been able to do that without pushback. Their whole media world is people who are pretty much like them. And it's like with this old boys network, you all bash people who don't look like you, and you always prop each other up as being right. That after a while, this whole kind of sense of superiority becomes almost natural, normal. You know what I mean? And I can tell you, we have the same in the Netherlands. The newspapers, the television programs, everything is about how backward the Muslims are in the Muslim world. And if you never get any pushback and you're just amongst each other, just agreeing with each other, like, yeah, you're right, man, they're backwards and we're great and this and that. The moment you have somebody who goes against you and comes with facts, that's just disturbing. That's destroying your worldview. And I think it's not particularly a liberal kind of things. And I think Josana would agree with me here. I think it's a Western white supremacist kind of thing. It doesn't matter if you have conservatives there or liberals or libertarians. It doesn't matter. You have a huge chunk of people in the West that are so indoctrinated with our superior ethnic European white supremacist Christian culture that you say something so ridiculous as, oh, but recently the Christianity hasn't done any harm like the Muslims have done. I mean, you must be so incredibly blind, socially blind, that you don't see the harm that your society is doing around the world, that you can say something like that. Oh yeah, but recently Christianity hasn't done any harm around the world. I mean, the past decade or 2 decades, the amount of millions of people in the Middle East that have been bombed by politicians that were saying that they were on a crusade and that kind of stuff. It's just baffling.
Manifest destiny. Like, we kill 100 million indigenous Americans.
Because I just want I quickly want to jump in on a comment just before this one. Can
Yeah,
you
go
go
ahead.
back to the comment before this one? This is such a good point by Georgie. I hope I pronounce your name correctly. This is such an important point, and this is what I often focus on in my academic work. White supremacy is so deep-rooted that Josana, me, and Nick have white supremacist tendencies, okay, and Malik and Asal. But the thing is, we are aware of them, and we are actively combating this white supremacist indoctrination that is being infused in our brains every day when we watch television, when we watch the news, when we read newspapers, when we even engage in science and read Western philosophers. This is so deep that for many people, it's just unimaginable that the West is the mistake here, that the West is the problem. It's so deep, you know, and like I said, it's so important that we have channels like this, you know, like and the International Leftist Coalition. Why? Because you, Asal, everyone in this panel, we are finally free to express the stuff we have felt for so many decades, but we had to keep watching to people like Bill Maher every day. Every day we put on the television, we read the newspaper, and we read our countries and cultures hammering on other people and people that you identify with. And we now finally have a way of venting that frustration that has been built up within us for many, many decades. That's why I say it's so important to have this panel and to have a channel like the Revolutionary Blackout Network and other radical channels, is because it's, like I say, it's a kind of it's almost like you release that these decades of pressure that you felt by always listening to these people like Bill Maher saying how inferior and ridiculous and bad the rest of the world is and how great they are. You know what I mean? And I don't know. I just wanted to express that it's a kind of way for us to finally, you know, say what has been on our heart for so many decades.
Yeah, I just
And
want to
I'm gonna
add.
get Malik
Go on,
here.
John.
I just want to say one little thing, Malik. And when you get offended because somebody black is calling out your white supremacist behavior, white person, that means that you are a white supremacist. And the reason why I'm dancing and making a little music is because I don't want to get all fired up and eat your heads off. But I'm gonna pass to Malik.
That's such a good point though. Like, even amongst my own friends and people in my own circles, like when I say to them, "You're a white supremacist," you know, they take it badly, you know, because I think there's been a co-opting of the term white supremacist, right? People think white supremacist is basically the Nazis, right, or the KKK. People think that you have to be that bad to be a white supremacist, but that's wrong. You know, like white supremacist comes in so many different shapes and forms. And I wanted to add a point about how, so for example, I think the main issue here is, I call it, it's like an epistemic apartheid, right? Any country or any society, any community that fights against or operates in a way that isn't sanctioned by the white supremacist liberal order, they are targeted for attack. And that's why Iran has always been targeted for attack, from the socialist government of Mossadegh when they, as mentioned before, renationalized the Anglo-Iranian oil company, to even, like, you know, post the Islamic Revolution. These are societies or ways of governance that go against the norm, right? They're not democratic as per like the global liberal order. They're not capitalist as per the global liberal order. There's something else, and you see it in North Korea, right? I'm not a fan of North Korea at all. I've got my criticisms of them, but the reason why North Korea is also targeted for, you know, so many attacks and sanctions and you know, hostile policies from the United States and the West is because they operate in a way that just isn't sanctioned. It isn't allowed. It isn't what these countries want the world to be, right? Sadly, I look at Africa with sadness because I feel like we've been totally conquered. We can't have our own societies. We can't even have our own countries. If you look at the borders in Africa, you see straight lines, right? These are fake nations that did not exist prior to colonization. They did not exist until Europeans came to our continent and literally violently redrew borders and created new fictional states that never existed before, right? So the point I'm trying to make here is that that's the main issue for me, right? It's like a battle of of knowledge, of a battle of how you run your societies, how you run your communities, how you exist as a person. You have to exist in the eyes of Europe. You have to exist in the eyes of white supremacy. You have to exist in the eyes of patriarchy, of heteronormativity, of cis normativity, you know, of this world order that was created after modernity. And there's this great book by Walter Mignolo. It's called The Darker Side of Western Modernity, where he explains a lot of this, right? About how the world was categorized and shaped and built in a certain way. And anyone who went against it, like Iran, would be targeted for violence. He gives the example of the Aymara in Bolivia, who they had their religion, right? Their idea of spirituality. It was very tied into the land. You couldn't own the land because, in a sense, you were a part of the land, and the land was a part of you. As a result of colonization, the Aymara now are just an ethnic group in Bolivia. They don't practice the religion of their ancestors. They don't have the same view of the environment. They use the land. They exploit the land like everywhere else in the world. And that's why we're facing the climate crisis, right? We've had this vision of how to, this vision of our relationship with the land, this European vision that was violently exported to the rest of the world. And this is a very dangerous vision, a very dangerous understanding of our relationship with the environment, because as you can see, it's killing our planet, right? It's killing our countries, it's killing our lands, it's killing our people, it's drowning people. And until we get out of this box, as Kareem said, until we understand these things and awaken ourselves to it and get out of it, right, we're going to continue seeing the same antagonisms. We're going to continue seeing the same, drone strikes, floods here, climate change there. We're going to continue seeing the same problems until everyone can wake up and get out of this set vision of the world that that the establishment likes to pretend that it's neutral, right? We like to pretend that, oh, democracy is natural. Oh, a nation state is natural, right? These things are neutral, natural things, but they're not. It's a particular thing created by white supremacy, created by European colonists, and yeah, we still see it today. And I do hope in my lifetime we can get out of it, but unless we have more conversations like this, right? More, more like platforms like this, I don't see a way out of it, really.
There's this the reason why this is my favorite panel, because there's usually so much good stuff that is said. I'm like, I can't even begin to unpack everything, but I'll start here because I always want to take my opportunity as a Black leftist and my personal Black experience to shift the Overton window to the left and wake people back up to reality. So Kareem made a good point. Like when you look at Bill Maher and his positions, that's conservative. You know what I mean? So when it's not just liberals, but it's conservatives, because what Bill Maher said is literally the exact same opinion like Stephen Miller would give you on the situation between in the Middle East, right? So I always want to let people know that if you think you're fighting white supremacy by allying with people like Bill Maher, you are widely mistaken. And me saying that, it was a shock to so many people. Like, it was such a controversial statement for me to say to the people who thought it was fighting white supremacy in 2020 by voting for Jim Crow Joe. And what I was saying to them, I was saying this does not make sense, because to me, white supremacy is the crime and violence that is done to our communities that is systematic. So how can you how can you claim you find white supremacy if you're allying with people like Bill Maher, Joe Biden, Anthony Blinken, who support giant military budgets and police budgets that continue to victimize our community, extract our wealth? So when people say they want to fight Trumpism, I'm like, I agree with you. I am on board with that idea. But there is no point in which you guys defeated Trumpism. Trumpism is alive and well. In fact, it's being expanded by a lot of Biden's policies. You're seeing more people being deported. You're seeing ICE budgets expand even more. You're seeing police getting more budgets. You're seeing him continue to try to implement coups in places like Venezuela. They put sanctions on Nicaragua as well, Honduras. This is a continuation of Trumpism. And why are we not able to take this out of our system despite democratic victories? Despite the fact that we had the first Black president win 2 terms. We defeat Donald Trump in the landslide, but it still consists. Why? Why? Because you guys haven't identified the enemy. We're gonna fight white supremacy. Woo, we're gonna end racism. Let's vote for Joe Biden. Let's vote for Kamala Harris, the person who implemented prison slave labor. And people got mad at me for pointing this out. This hypocrisy out. And when you see that Bill Maher clip, you see who's uncomfortable. Joy-Ann Reid. Another topic I want to get onto. I know I'm going long, but these panels invoke so much thought, right? So I want to accurately define white supremacy. So what Kareem said is 100% true, and I don't want you guys to get the wrong impression, because I go after liberals a lot because people haven't identified the enemy. But it is liberals and conservatives. It's the one-party state that they pick wedge issues to make you think they really oppose. But when you hear Bill Maher, when you hear Kamala Harris, when you hear Anthony Blinken, where the difference in foreign policy between them and Stephen Miller? It doesn't exist. When you look at MSNBC and they running lies on Julian Assange, Joy-Ann Reid, the same one. When you see them lying about defunding police, right? Joy-Ann Reid did multiple times because she's the black anchor, the black cable anchor. So it's her job to move the Overton window to the right. I see her did constant segments where she blatantly lied about the state of the police budgets. That's her role. So why, when people talk about white supremacy, Joy-Ann Reid is never part of this conversation? Why is Barack Obama never part of this conversation? Why is Eric Adams never part of this conversation? Eric Adams won the mayor race, dominated the black vote because people don't know how to identify the enemy. So many black liberals was misled by people thinking, oh, if you vote for Eric Adams, this is a vote for the black community. Eric Adams, to this day, supports stop and frisk. And he said that on the campaign trail. And he was elected. And you guys wonder why we can't get rid of white supremacy, because you guys can't identify the enemy. So that's why I always go after liberals, because everyone knows conservatives are bad. So no matter what your victories are, if you don't identify the enemy will continue to win and grow, which is the situation we're in right now. Sorry I went long, but there's so many thought-provoking things that you guys brought up, and that's my take on it. I'll pass it to Dosano if anyone want to jump in.
If I can jump in just very quickly after Josanna, is that okay? Well, I'll go really quickly.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted that made me think about Malcolm X, because I'm gonna have to be corrected if I'm wrong here, but I'm pretty sure that he refused to run for office despite many people wanting him to run for office, and he probably could have. He probably could have won whatever race he went for, because he's just the most charismatic, amazing person to listen to. But I think the fact that he never went for office goes to show that he recognized that you can't change the system from within, right? And to even run for office is to accept that the United States is a legitimate entity. I refuse to recognize the United States. This isn't a real country to me. This is a settler colonial nation state, and its political institutions are fake, and I refuse to recognize any of it. And I think Malcolm X also likely would have had the same view, right? He would have said, let's not even recognize the United States. Just do away with this entire system, do away with its institutions, do away with the entire entity, right? I think that's something that we should maybe consider.
Yes, and I love to see, like, because I look at the comments, right? I love to see, like, oh, but what if they were not like white skinned? Would they be considered white supremacists? Yes. Let's learn once and for all, people, because we have shit to do. Oops. We have stuff to do. We have job to get done. Like, I was talking to people this weekend, and I was like, to be honest, the rest of the world is kind of tired of y'all. Not kinda. We are very tired of y'all. Like, let's learn and keep on moving, because we have work to be done, things to be fixed, an empire to overthrow. And let's understand that what put the empire there, it's white supremacy. The only way we can destroy capitalism is if we destroy white supremacy, is if we end racism. Because as long as one has to be superior to the other, and by one I say white, then we cannot have equality. Then we cannot coexist in community with our differences. Then we cannot coexist in democracy. Democracy, as we know, it's not democracy. It's a lie. It's propaganda. We spoke to all of this until we got to this point right now. How can a country that has all kinds of nuclear weapons say that Iran poses a threat to the world because they are building a bomb, one bomb? They are dictating rules to the world. The empire is so crazy, and by empire, I mean United States of America, that is dictating war rules to the rest of the world. And the only way we overthrow the empire is when we fix the empire roots inside of us. And I'm not saying that should be philosophical and cute and nice. No. The transformation we want to see in society comes from the transformation in us. Otherwise, it's superficial, and we're going to have a king soon. As soon as we overthrow this king that is on now, we're going to have another one. So yes, Obama is a white supremacist. I have white supremacy roots inside of me, and every day I do a work inside of me to see that. And I'm telling you all here, and Kareem said that, and we all say that all the time, that it doesn't even matter if I am white. It's inside me because the world is being ruled by it since it sees itself as an organized world with borders, with governments, with a set of rules that's called society. So yes, if they were not white-skinned, they would be called white supremacists. And we have to wash that away from our veins. And every time you become, I'm so sorry, Nick, we're not going to have any monetization in this show, sorry. But as soon as we become butthurt by that word, that is a sign that we have to wash that away from us. As soon as we feel attacked by a Black person, by a person of color, saying white supremacy is destroying the world, then it's time to self-check, self-critique, and then move on. Because like if every time we bring that up and people will be like, hurting my feelings, then we're not going to even see the beginning of the change. Not even the next generation will see it. Is it so hard? Is it good for you, but hurt person, the way the world is right now? I don't think so. Everybody's anguished. Everybody's in pain. Everybody's walking around without knowing what to do. Everybody's not happy. Are we really? Our existence, is it really to be that painful? Because then they went over and created religions that tells us every day that we are supposed to feel pain in order to grow and one day maybe achieve the God outside of us that is dictating the rules. Really? You're not going to even believe in your own divinity? So I'm here inviting you to see your own divinity, and you don't want to fly with me? You want to be a pigeon? You want to have wings, but you want to eat crumbs on the floor? They are given to you by that disgusting, stinky old lady sitting on the fucking bench in the fucking square every day at 5 p.m. You could fly high, my friend. You could fly high. But you want to eat from the floor, from somebody else's hands. Check yourself out.
Yeah, well
I
said,
think I still
Josanna.
wanted to go.
Go ahead, Asal.
Um, I was just, in listening to the comments that everybody has, obviously, ultimately, the question becomes, how do we change a system that we find fundamentally flawed, right? And Nick brought up this idea of why he targets liberals. I think it's interesting because the liberals that we're talking about are at their core conservative. And what does that mean? If you look at the word conservative, I mean, its literal meaning is to conserve, right? And what is it conserving? It's conserving a status quo. So while liberals want to have policies that might be different than, if like Democrats want to have policies that are different than Republicans, neither of them wants to change the status quo, right? And so in that sense, um, the liberals that we see today are at their core conservatives because they're trying to maintain that status quo. I mean, this administration is saying that flat out, right? Like they wanted America is back. That's what Biden keeps saying. So the idea is to say everything is great the way that we have it, and we should maintain it, but maybe we should just tweak some things. It's like we're the greatest country in the world. We just have to refine it a little bit, and that sort of ignores those fundamental flaws. But the question becomes, how do you actually go about changing them? What it requires, if we're looking at if we're thinking about it again in this fundamental way, is drastic reformation that actually changes that status quo, right? So that to me is why we're not seeing a great differentiation between a lot of the political parties that we're seeing, is because they're not really trying to change it, right? They're trying to maintain it, but ostensibly talk about differences between them. And I think that's something important to think about. And I just wanted to add one thing that goes back to something Malik was saying, about this sort of like history of colonialism. Is one of the aspects of colonialism we almost never talk about is the environment. There's this great book by an environmental historian, I think he's like considered the father of environmental history, Alfred Crosby, called Ecological Imperialism. And the book is fascinating because what Crosby is talking about is the consequences of colonialism on the environment. Like, ask on average how many people know that cows, for instance, are not indigenous to the Americas. Those were brought by Europeans. Essentially, if you look at Australia, if you look at the Americas, if you look at these places where colonialism spread out and created settler colonies, they also created little Europes. That's what Crosby posits, because his point is to say that they colonized everything. They colonized the flora and the fauna. They changed the animals and the plants. Part of the reason why so many natives died was because of the fact that we also brought pathogens with us. Kareem, I'm going back to what you said earlier. Europeans brought pathogens with them when they were colonizing. And so there's these aspects of colonialism. When you think about, people think that colonialism has sort of ended. We live in a post-colonial world. We absolutely do not. But beyond that, there's aspects of colonialism that we never even think about because we just assume, this is always how the planet was. It was not. And so there's all sorts of aspects to it that I think we should consider in these discussions.
Right.
Kareem, please.
Yes. So this is an interesting topic. You see that we in this panel and on this channel often come back to the big WS word, white supremacy. And why do we keep coming back to white supremacy all the time? As if we are like obsessed by it or something. And I think that every single person in this panel, and pretty much everyone, I should say, around the world, but in specifically us, we all have suffered under white supremacy in one way or the other. Okay, I was born in the Netherlands from a Dutch mother and an Algerian father. My father comes from a colonized country. They had their own independence struggle. I see white supremacy all around me when I put on the television, when I see my politicians say the most vile things about people who are classified as non-white. And people who become uncomfortable when we talk about white supremacy. Oh, to talk about white supremacy again. This shows to me it's a sore spot and we need to keep talking about it. If you don't want a leftist channel that mentions white supremacy,
You should go to white leftist channels that bash critical race theory, that bash people who mention white supremacy, that bash people who always talk about race, because we find it a very, very important and almost central problem to the world that we live in. Now, the other thing I also heard people say, but what about Obama? Obama is black. Well, I always call these people system justifying people of color. If you are a person that maintains a system that structurally advantages people classified as white, then you're a white supremacist. I don't care what is your skin color. I don't care your religion. If you actively maintain a system that advantages people classified as white, you're a white supremacist. Very simple. And the problem with white supremacy is not like KKK or neo-Nazis or that kind of stuff. These are extremists. The problem with white supremacy is that it is a Western cultural phenomenon, the construct of whiteness, just lumping people together and calling them white and distincting them from the rest of the world is a how can I say that, a fundament, a foundation on which our culture is built. So it's everywhere. It's when you open your school books, okay, and you read about philosophers, scientists, inventions. Check how many of them are people of color or people who are non-Western, non-white, non-Christian. Okay, that's number one. Watch the news, watch movies, watch fashion, play video games. Who are the heroes? It's everywhere. Okay, and growing up as a child, as a mixed race kid, with a father from a colonized country, you are every day, you are bombarded with your own inferiority in one way, shape, or form. Whether it's because he is from the Middle East, whether he was a former colonized person, whether you're not fully classified as European white, it doesn't matter. White supremacist culture indoctrinates in everyone who are not fully classified as white their own inferiority every day, everywhere. Billboards on the streets, movies you watch, newspapers you read, stories you hear from your parents, it's everywhere. And people who become frustrated that we talk about white supremacy are the people who have never suffered that intense inferiority complex. It bombards into people who are not classified as white on a day-to-day basis. And as long as that's here, we are not going to stop talking about it. So my hope is, and to just jump to what Malik just said, are we going to experience it? I don't think so. But what we can do is actively contribute and do our best that our children and our children's children will experience a world where they don't grow up feeling inferior as a human being because they don't fit that identity that has been created by our forefathers that is so-called superior. You know what I mean? That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I'll go after
Sorry,
you.
go.
I'll go after you.
Well, I was just going to say, like, that's absolutely amazing. Like, I think the trouble is, yeah, we don't even have the time to not change things, right? Because the next generation is being born into a dangerous world, one where you have flash floods everywhere. I just read that was it Kentucky that had like a tornado or something that killed scores of people. This is becoming normal, you know. I was just reading it on my phone and I didn't see it anywhere else really on social media. I saw a few criticisms about how Amazon forced their workers to remain in unsafe conditions, but stuff like these tornadoes, these flash floods, these earthquakes, this is becoming so normalized and we're becoming desensitized to these things, and this will be the new norm. You know, this will happen on a weekly basis. Scores of people will die, and that's because we've got this system. You know, we need to change the system. We need to remove white supremacy. We need to remove this dangerous form of capitalism that is causing all of this, right? Causing all of these environmental consequences. And in terms of how we do that, I think it really depends on where you are, because I think if you're in the diaspora, like myself, you know, if you're in the UK, the US, Canada, in the West, I think that reform is the way to go. And the reason why I say that is well, you've seen what the state does, right? When people protest, the state uses violence, right? The state has a monopoly on violence and will use the police. It will use riot officers. It will use the military, even, right? If you look at the BLM protests, right, there are so many photos of heavily militarized armed police officers at like like government offices or like the Capitol building, etc. They went all out to fight the BLM protests, which are very like weak. Let's be real. The BLM protests weren't asking for much. They were just asking for the system to actually work. They weren't even trying to overturn the system, right? Yet that was the response to it. Whereas in the January 6th Capitol insurrection, you saw the exact opposite, right? When white people, when white conservatives, when the demographic who are at the top of these global hierarchies, when they riot, when they protest, when they attack the system, it's allowed. You don't see that heavy-handed response. You don't see like riot shields and militarized police officers, like attacking them with batons or whatever. You don't see that same reaction to it. So my opinion is, if you're a person of color in the West, I think revolution isn't the way to go, because it's dangerous, right? And we just end up dead, right? We end up like Fred Hampton, like Malcolm X, like Martin Luther King, dead, riddled with bullets. That's the truth, the sad truth of it. Whereas in Africa, I feel like there's no choice, right? In Africa, I feel like it has to be revolution, because the system is so violent in Africa. It kills up to 3 million sub-Saharan children under the age of 5 every single year. Every single year. We are used to seeing these photos of starved, emaciated African children with pot bellies on our TVs. And that's how it's been, since the 70s, since Live Aids, since forever. We've always seen these photos. We've always seen this violence perpetuated onto Africans, and we've accepted it. It's normal, right? And that's why for Africa, it has to be revolution. There's no choice. One more thing that I want to add is that white supremacy and its tentacles in Africa, it's the next level, in my opinion. I went back to Senegal. That's where my parents are from. I went there for the first time when I was 16, and I was surprised to find a country where the language of government is French. The language in schools is French. The language of business is French. And if you want to get anything done, like paperwork wise, it's in French. The passport is in French. ID card, French. Rent, taxes, utilities, French. Everything is written and done in French in a country that has been independent for over 60 years. Right. And then even when you do speak a national language, Wolof is the language that my parents speak. When they write in Wolof, they're writing using the Latin alphabet, which is that's a European alphabet, right? Like, we don't even have our own languages. We don't have our own alphabet. So our African alphabets, right? You do have like American, Ethiopia, but really in most of Africa, if you're not using the Latin alphabet, you're using the Arabic alphabet. So it just goes to show that we are so colonized in Africa. It even affects our language. It affects our verbal language and our written language too, right? There's no limit to it. So that just adds to the further urgency for revolution in Africa. White supremacy has affected our countries so much to the point where reform isn't an option. We don't even have a choice. There is no choice in Africa. It has to be revolution and nothing else.
That's a very interesting point of view. I'm gonna offer an alternative viewpoint, and also want to chime in on some things Kramer said as well. So there is a very important point you made regarding Black Lives Matter, because me and Ron, to this pain, and many people, ever since I met Ron, me and Ron been calling out Black Lives Matter, because Black Lives Matter was an organization that was started under Barack Obama by Black radicals, that was hijacked by the white liberal class. Look at all the blue checks on Twitter. They all got Black Lives Matter in their profile. So what happened? You had Black Lives Matter that was cheering for Joe Biden when he won. They were cheering for Jim Crow Joe. How is that going for you guys? Now that he's actually committed to expanding the drug war, he expanded mandatory minimums that Trump endorsed as well. There is a reason why Black Lives Matter started under Barack Obama. And now this is the only difference I have to what Malik said. I really do believe we need a left that is well armed and honestly more militarized. because we have seen the death of our people in response of basic acts. What am I saying? How did Black Lives Matter get destroyed? Let me show you guys this. This is something. What other channel is going to show you guys this? Only Black Leftists. And come on, hold. Let me get this off. And I live in Missouri. This is kind of stuff you hear about when you live around here. If you're in leftist spaces, I live in Kansas City. Ferguson is 2.5 hours away from me. And I know people who was involved in this. A puzzling number of men tied to Ferguson protests have since died. And now there's a lot of speculation on what happened to these people. But if you read this article and you look into the story, there are a lot of mysterious stuff that's going on with these activists that are militant and challenge the police state. And then this same story I heard about regarding Standing Rock, when we have indigenous protesters are assassinated, that are killed, that mysteriously vanished. Now we can cry, we can despair over the reality of the situation, but we have to start embracing community defense. And this is something that the liberal class will never talk about. This is something that the liberal class will never talk about. Our community has been under siege by the CIA, the FBI, and the police state. They siphoned untold amount of money from our communities. So there are extreme struggles that our brothers and sisters are going on in Africa. There are Muslim brothers and sisters going on in the Middle East. But if you look at the struggles in the Black community, if you look at the infrastructure that is rated worse than some of the poorest countries in the world, and if you look at Alabama, Louisiana, who do you think has been impacted by this the most? I know because I went to South Carolina, and I was horrified by the conditions my brothers and sisters are living under. When we talk about fighting this police state and in this police state, are we going to end this through electoral politics? I don't think so. So what is the other option? Now we talking about climate change. We talk about the military that is polluting our water system. Now, there's just a new story about the Navy polluting the indigenous Hawaiian water supply. And I covered the story on my channel. No one else did as well, how the military is poisoning the Black community. Are we just to accept this? Are we just to continue along the line of electoral politics? Once again, I know exactly what you're saying, Malik, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying. This just be my alternative. Just propose these questions, right? So now I want to go to Kareem. I know we're getting long, but these panels are so like there's so many good points I want to get on. So one last thing, and this kind of goes to Josiah's point and Assad's points as well, regarding the use of race and how people get offended because on this channel we're not afraid of talking about race, right? And I actually reject the premise of a lot of people. Like this is when I talk about politics, I will reject your premise if I don't accept it. Now, there's a premise that you look at Black leftists, you look at indigenous leftists, you look at Latino leftists, all they do is talk about race. Oh my God, why won't you analyze class? Why don't you do class analysis on the stuff? That ignores the fact that me and Kareem broke down many times that class is race. So there's a big education gap that people don't understand, that our financial situation is impacted by the realities of race. I talk about how civil asset forfeiture steals wealth from Black Americans at a 60% rate. That is way higher than everyone else. So are you going to ignore that reality on how race connects to class in that situation? So you guys understand, what is identity politics? Identity politics is politics. How does government action affect your community? And now the same people who say, hey, yo, you guys always talk about race. If you look at conservatives, if you look at Tucker Carlson, if you look at the Republican Party, what is the Republican Party other than white identity politics? Do they believe in fiscal conservatism? Hell no. They just gave corporations trillions of dollars of bailouts. They support a healthcare system that costs more than the leftist alternative, Medicare for All. They actually expanding our police budget to the point where our police will be the third-ranked military in the world, period. And we continue to expand the military budget. So are Republicans, are conservatives fiscally conservative? No. Are they for family values? No, because they want you to be a wage slave. What the only thing they talk about? Look, turn to Tucker Carlson. They talk about the white displacement theory. They talk about the white. Do you guys understand that open borders is a right-wing economic idea? That's where it originated from. They went from that because they believe in the freedom of movement. How do you supposed to be a conservative who believe in small government, but you believe the government should tell you where you should go? That's the original idea that right-wing libertarians reach. They're like, Nah, I think we should have open borders because we believe in freedom. You guys went from that to believing in this inhumane, strict immigration policy that we have because you're scared that the white populace, there's going to be some sort of white genocide. This is what you guys believe. But you want to say I use identity politics? This is the entire root of your belief system. Look at every single. Oh, we got to come out in droves for this election because we got to stop critical race theory. Your entire politics is based on white identity politics. So I don't even want to hear from you guys when you act like, oh my God, black people always want to talk about race. Latinos always want to talk about race. No, it's you. It's you. I have another point, but I'll pass it to the panel because I went long enough. I'll pass it right back to the panel, and I'll continue later.
Just a quick thing, what Nick said, and then I'll shut up. But you know what's so hypocrite? First, Western culture, European culture creates racial categories. Okay, these completely nonsense racial categories: black, white, yellow, and starts to create systematic and structural hierarchies based on these categories. Then finally, after hundreds of years, we start mentioning these categories and then that we don't want these hierarchies. And then we're engaging in identity politics and we should shut up about race. In other words, maintain the status quo. People who don't want to talk about race want you to be quiet, keep things as they are, and maintain the status quo. That's what I want to say. Oh yeah, one quick thing as well about race and class. As a social scientist, we always say class and race interact. Okay, they are not completely the same, but they interact, which means that you have the construct of class in a capitalist system, you have the construct of race in a capitalist system, but they interact, meaning that things become worse if you are, for example, black and of low socioeconomic class versus white and of low socioeconomic class. And things are better if you are white and high class versus black and high class. So in other words, it's not just class, it's not just race, both interact, and both we need to mention to deconstruct these inequalities we see in society. Thank you, Justin.
I want to get Asol here.
Well, actually, I have to hop off, unfortunately. But it's funny because Nick brought up this idea that it's actually on like the white right where these conversations are being had. There's almost like a fear, right? A fear of the loss of white supremacy, right? That is the fear. That is the actual fear. And in a certain way, it's the notion is to project, right? They're sort of projecting their own insecurities of seeing people actually questioning these systems and turning that into some kind of form of reverse racism. And I always found this concept of reverse racism so frustrating to listen to because race is a social construct. Racism is an institution. The entire concept of racism as an institution is to say that there is a structure in place that allows one group to reign supreme and dominate other groups. The only way for white people to experience that is to inverse the entire system from its bottom to its top. And so it's so frustrating when you hear this idea that, white people are in danger. They're only in danger of losing their own supremacy. That's all anybody is literally calling for. When people talk about race, when people talk about equality, they're not talking about inversing the system. They are talking about equalizing the system. And those are two entirely different things. And that's my sort of last 2 cents before hopping off.
Yeah, thank you it's always good to have us on these panels. Thank you for coming on and sticking with us. Any last comment, any last words you want to say before you jump off? Any last thing you want to promote?
No, nothing to promote. Just you guys keep going and great.
I think we got another 30 minutes, right, Josana? I have one more thing I want to add to the conversation.
We have a lot coming.
Yeah.
I just want to let Asol go. Yes.
Yeah. Asol, see you next week.
Yeah.
We hear. Yay.
Good.
Hi guys.
Thank you so much, Asol. It's always an honor to have you here. Okay, let's go. Let's introduce, because we are in the little white supremacist white supremacy. I'm saying the white supremacy word. Like I care for your butts hurts. I love that I speak English very in a very bad way, so I can say all the bad words with my accent, and that offends more. Anyways, we are gonna move on to the next topic, which is very like similar to what we already talking about, and it's one of the main reasons why we have Malik here. It's the new immigration bill, right? In England. And we brought this conversation, our last show, Kareem, Peter, Assault, we were discussing about the European xenophobia tendency, right? The racist, anti immigration European tendency that's going on right now. So, England has a bill about it, and I will let Malik give us an introduction. Then I'm going to get Nick on it, and then Kareem, so we can keep on going.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me again here on the show. Like, I really do appreciate the platform. Um, I think the other thing I appreciate is that it is being discussed. In the UK, whilst this bill was being passed, I was looking everywhere for it, for any discussion of it. I found one newspaper that talked about it. One newspaper, not even the BBC, which is it's meant to be the neutral government like media organization. Not even they discussed it, which was shocking to me because this is an incredible bill. So, in regards to what this bill is, it's called the Nationality and Borders Bill. And what it basically does is it allows the British government to revoke citizenship without any notice, right? So just like that, from any citizen who can claim citizenship from another country. So if you are already a dual citizen, your citizenship can be removed. If you've got the eligibility to claim another citizenship, then your citizenship can also be removed. And that means even a grandparent, right? So let's say you're a white British person and you've got an Irish grandparent, you could technically have your citizenship removed. And the reason why I bring that example is because I had to really try and center this discussion on white people to get white allies to get involved. Because it was just in Britain, the situation is dire here. We really do have to center white people in our racial discussions, which is sad, but that's the truth of it. Otherwise, they just wouldn't care. The fact is that this bill is a racist bill that disproportionately affects people of color. Black Brits like myself are the most affected by it. And it's not just the fact that our citizenship can be removed without notice, it's also without appeal, without the right to appeal. We can't even challenge it. For me, that's the most hateful part of it, right? They're not even giving us a chance to challenge it. Right? It's just like that. They remove it, it's done. You can't challenge it. You can't do anything about it. You're no longer a citizen. And this came after a similar thing happened to Shamima Begum, who was a 15-year-old South Asian girl. That's her ethnicity, but she's a British citizen. Her parents are also British citizens. She was 15 years old when she was groomed by Islamic State, and she traveled to Syria. And she had 3 children. All 3 children have passed away, sadly, and she's 20 years old. So she's had a lot of trauma, a lot of awful things that she's seen and witnessed. And again, I need to echo this point. She was groomed at the age of 15. Her mother, if I'm correct, had passed away, so she was in a vulnerable place when she made the decision to go to Syria. And with the British media and the British public being very racist, people were saying remove her citizenship, revoke her citizenship. British citizenship is a privilege and not a right. And that's what our Home Secretary did. Our Home Secretary at the time, Sajid Javid, is also a man of South Asian heritage. So, like Obama, you've got a person of color who is reinforcing white supremacy, right? He's another great example of that. But at the time, myself and many other people, we all said this is a bad precedent. This is a bad precedent. You cannot allow the government to revoke citizenship just like that. We all said it. No one cared. And now this bill has come to place where up to 6 million people now have their citizenship jeopardized. 6 million people. And that includes almost 500,000 people who were born in Britain. So you've got people who were born in the UK, raised in the UK, never stepped foot outside the country, right? Both their parents can be of the same situation too, born in the UK, never stepped foot outside of the country, but because they have one grandparent or great grandparent who was born in another country or is from another country, they can have their citizenship revoked. And that is scary. It is authoritarian. We are living in a fascist nation. I like to say it is a fascist nation because on top of this bill, you've also got another bill which is called the Police Crime Sentencing and Communities Bill. I probably got that wrong, the PCSC bill. That bans protest, right? It basically bans protest to the point where if you want to protest, you need to get the police's permission to protest, which is absurd. You need to get the police's permission on the route of your protest, the time of your protest. So if you start a protest at, let's say, if the police say you have to protest between 11 and 4, right? That's the only time you're allowed to protest. If you come at 10:30, that's now an illegal protest, and you could face theoretically up to 10 years in prison. Would that ever happen? I don't think so, but that it could happen is worrying. On top of that, there's also limits on noise levels. So if the police say that your protest is too noisy, they can shut it down and again turn it into an illegal protest. If you refuse, if you don't comply, once more you could face time in jail. And look up Insulate Britain. They are this climate group. Who they're like Extinction Rebellion. They're calling attention to the climate change crisis. Their main goal is to insulate all houses in Britain so that nobody freezes to death, right? Because with climate change, we are going to have colder winters, we're going to have harsher winters, and not all houses in the UK are insulated. Even my windows, they're not double glazed, so a lot of heat goes just straight out of my window. Insulate Britain wants all houses in Britain to be insulated. Not a bad goal. But to achieve their goal, they protest, they block roads, they cause damage to highways by gluing themselves onto it. They target like high emission areas so people can't drive through. They've been arrested, right? Many of their protesters have been arrested for protesting and sent to jail. They have literally been sent to jail for protesting. And that is Britain today in the 21st century. So not only do we have this attack on our citizenship, but we also have this attack on our right to protest. And as people of color, knowing that if we do protest, we could get arrested and sent to jail for it, we can't even protest this bill to jeopardize our citizenship, right? Because we don't want to get deported. We don't want to have our citizenship revoked. So, myself and many other people of color, we are so many white allies. Protest for us, come out, organize. But it's like no one's doing anything. It's a really dire situation here because the media is not reporting on it. Organizations are saying next to nothing about it. The Labour Party, which is our, I guess, equivalent of the Democrats, they're useless. They don't really care. It's a very dire situation. I don't mean to be pessimistic, but that's just how it is at the moment, unfortunately.
Yeah, we got to talk about the reality of the situation because we gotta make sure people are prepared, and there are a lot of people who are not prepared by people who preach incrementalism, preach that things will be okay. We show to the ballot box, whatever. That doesn't get you prepared for what's going on. And I have a take on. I know exactly why this is happening, and we see the same thing in America that Republicans and Democrat lawmakers support, where they're like cracking down on protesters, especially in the light of the George Floyd protest, which was one of the largest displays in American history, at least since the civil rights era, right? So now we have the rise of homelessness population. We got the climate crisis that's going to make the giant migration crisis even worse. So there are a lot of Republicans who like to fearmonger over immigration, but they don't want to do anything about the climate crisis, which is going to lead to a mass migration crisis we have never seen in the history of humanity, where sub-Saharan Africa, many places in the Middle East are not going to be inhabitable anymore. Many fisher markets, their economies are being destroyed, and they have to readjust because a lot of the fish are dying in the area because the CO2 is acidifying the ocean. So a lot of these fish are not even allowed to be sold or ate anymore in a lot of these markets. So when you have conservatives and liberals that argue what is the real effects of climate change, we see it right now. Like we see everything that's going to happen in late stage capitalism popping off in the way that I kind of see coming, right? All this stuff is coming to the head. Climate crisis, the homelessness crisis, and now they're trying their best to like blame COVID, but this was going to happen regardless. Like this, just to be clear, guys, this was going to happen regardless. So why are they cracking down on protesters, right? Why do you see expansion of state violence? We're in the middle of a pandemic. We're in the middle of a homelessness crisis. But despite the fact that we have no health care, despite the fact that inflation is out of control, what is the priority of the Biden regime? The priority of the Biden regime, which he have bipartisan consensus with, is to fund the police more. They are funding the police more, despite that we have record homelessness, no people without health care. So you ask yourself, why is that their priority? These people that are in charge of running the establishment, they are not as dumb as we will have them believe them, right? A lot of people like to look at George Bush. Oh, George Bush is a buffoon. Joe Biden is an old, demented old man. Donald Trump is a clown. But these people know what they're doing. So when they ramp up the police budgets, now you got the cops that are breaking up homeless encampments by force, which I covered on my show. This is by design. They know late-stage capitalism is happening right now. They know life is getting hard for people right now. So you gotta prop up a giant fascist police state in order to maintain the order when people's quality of life continue to drop. And another thing, one last thing I add, and I'll talk to the panel. You create massive divisions among the workers. Oh, you gotta blame your friend. You gotta blame the unvaccinated for the situation that we're in instead of the ruling class. You gotta blame the people who are pushing critical race theory for the poor working white class being in the shape they're in. And that is by design as well, in order to stop people to organizing against the people who are waging class war. Amazon is waging class war. Elon Musk is waging class war. All these people are waging class war, but they want to keep us divided over other issues, so we don't wage that war back. And now to the topic of the discussion, I'll pass it to the panel, but we talk about these issues in terms of white supremacy and challenging the police state because I want to know where you stand. I want to know where you stand because historically, especially in the United States, in the Western left, you have coalitions that form with black communities and white communities. And then when it comes to negotiations, are you guys going to sell this out to the police state? The progressives did that when they funded the Capitol Police more. When FDR, like Savvy, did a presentation that explains how Black America was left out by New Deal economics that was fought by union workers and socialists, right? You guys know that was a concerted effort by a lot of white leftists. There was a large debate among white socialists on whether they should adopt the problems and the struggle of the Negro community. And they came to the consensus that we should not because they don't want to upset the middle. What does it sound like? So what I'm saying is, when I build my resistance army, when we build our movement, I'm not allowing. I'm sorry, it makes you uncomfortable. I'm not allowing you guys to sell us out again. When we get to the point where we gotta negotiate, you're not gonna be like, okay, let's get this, but we fund the police more. Let's get this, but we drop more bombs over here. No more of that. We gotta draw that to an end. So that's my take over on the story. Everything that you see here with the rise of authoritarianism on our communities, that's the response of that. And the same Republicans, because they oppose mandates, and this is something I've seen hilarious. Tim Iverson was like, I oppose mandates, so we have to have an anti-authoritarian coalition. So from now on, I'm not going to support Democrats. I'm not going to support the Green Party. I'm going to support the Republican Party because I oppose mandates. So I oppose anti-authoritarianism. This is what Kim Iverson said with a straight face. So the same party that supports the Patriot Act, the same party that supports NSA spying, the same party that is expanding surveillance powers to the police, you're going to support that party. And you think you're fighting authoritarianism? The Tucker Carlson fans, they swear up and down that they're fighting authoritarianism. No, you're not. You guys are the biggest authoritarians. The biggest. You guys want to control the flow of workers, which is once again, open borders is a pro-worker policy. You guys want to control the flow of workers. Meanwhile, companies can just ship their work anywhere they want. They can have child slaves. You guys don't give a fuck. But anyway, I'm going too long. Sorry, I passed to the panel. My point is these people are not anti-authoritarian. They're not. They pretend they are, but they're not. because they support giant police budgets. How are you gonna say you're anti-authoritarian but you support stop and frisk? Someone's playing. You support the drug war and you say you anti-authoritarian? Can we get serious? Once again, we play a great clip of Glenn Greenwald. So once again, I can be nuanced. That was a great clip. He destroyed Bill Maher. But he one of the people who's like, oh, I oppose anti-authoritarianism. But he's defending giant police budgets. He's attacking activists who are demanding us to defend the police. And I'm not going to hold back because that's intellectual consistency that I called out when I see it. We gave Greenwald props for his stance on anti-imperialism, but he does this thing where he's like, I'm going to attack the left because they support defunding the police. If you support the fascist police budgets that you guys know the NYPD spends 3 times more on their police budgets than the North Korea does on their military. Oh, the scary North Koreans. The North Koreans, they're so authoritarian, but we spend 3 times more in one city than they do on their military. But you want to say you're anti-authoritarian when you support the police states? Get real. Get real. You are not anti-authoritarian if you support the Republican Party, if you support the Democrat Party. If we're clear.
I just want to say that, like, to me, it's very personal to me, this bill, like, because actually Trump was trying in his last year to stripe citizenship from people. He was trying to do so and he was stopped, but he did create a bill where if you are an immigrant, if you have a visa, a working visa or a green card, and you are arrested in a protest, you can be immediately deported. And when I was reading the articles about the bill in England, and I saw that they can send away people in the sea, and I'm like, dude, why do you think someone is gonna jump in a mini boat, in a floaty, and swim across the sea to go to your country? It's because your country is abusing that person's country. It has sucked the natural resources so much that there's nothing left there. And they have to feed their families. And they have to feed themselves. They are fighting for survival. And what you're going to do is say no. And they are still in the ocean. So there's no care for human life. And I think we, as, I don't like to call myself a leftist, because the sense of it in this country, USA, is leaves a bad taste in my mouth. I'm an anarchist, a very radical Black anarchist from South America. Yeah. And the immigration crisis, you want to call it a crisis, or the open air racism and xenophobia in both countries, it hurts me in a personal spot. It hurts me because I'm from a country that is exploited by the USA. And I am the descendant of people from a continent and a country, Somalia, that is exploited by the UK. So there is no care for the human life. They can tell you that they care for human life. You can believe in that BS they're telling you. But it was just yesterday that Amazon workers died, right? Because Amazon didn't allow their workers to go home before the storm. Where is the care for the human life? So if these things are not clear, we won't change anything. I want to pass to Kareem and then back to Malik.
If you don't mind, Kareem, I can set you up with this. I want to share this before I head out here. Because I'll toss it to you, Kareem. I'm going to present the story first here. This is what you shared, and I want you to give background into this, because I think you know more than I do. The Justice Ministry wants to permanently strip the rights, they want to permanently right to strip Dutch nationality from terrorists.
Yeah. So if you go to a bit down further, until now, it says that the paragraph where it starts
Right
until
here.
now. Yeah. So why am I asking you to do this? Because I noticed something, and it makes sense because English, of course, is the world language. I noticed that when we are talking about issues, we act as if they are new because it hits the Anglo-Saxon world, like the UK. These kind of discussions we already have for years in the rest of Western Europe, like the Netherlands, that already has stripped 17 people of their nationality. But we can talk about Belgium, we can talk about France, we can talk about Denmark. This seems to be a European-wide issue, the deep-rooted racism in our politics that wants to strip nationality of people. And don't worry, like I say, Malik, you say, hey, we need white allies. And I agree with you. In Europe, white allies are few and far between. I don't know why, but it's somehow very hard to get mass white allies in Europe. I think white supremacist culture is still too deep rooted in our cultures to really understand the suffering of people who are classified as non-white, like people from the former colonies. But why is this so important? When I was born, and here you see the deep-rooted racism and patriarchy in this whole double nationality crap. When I was born, because my dad is Algerian, I was forced to get an Algerian nationality next to my Dutch nationality. Now listen to the interesting part. That was back in those days. That was back in the 80s. When I was born. However, now comes the interesting part. If my mom would be Algerian and my dad would be Dutch, I would only get the Dutch nationality. So in other words, when the nationality of your mother just is not important or something. Okay, so you even see that the kind of historical patriarchy and that kind of nonsense stuff as well. But we have the discussion already for many years. The continuous blame on people with a double nationality. Oh, they are doubly loyal. You cannot trust them. They don't want to be citizens of the Netherlands, even though you are forced to have two nationalities and you cannot get rid of it. This is the interesting part. You cannot get rid of it. You're just being bashed by politicians for no reason. And while you cannot even defend yourself, or you cannot even say, okay, I want to get rid of the passport. I just want only my Dutch passport. You can't. You know what I mean? So what I'm trying to say is that we need more internationalism in Europe as well. People like Malik, people like myself, people in other countries. I have some friends in Sweden, for example, who are also of mixed race or immigrant descent. We need to also connect among Europeans because it seems to be a very, very dire situation in Europe. And I think why is this so important? Because they will always say, oh, they can strip you of your nationality only in very extreme cases such as terrorism. You know what I mean? Don't forget that in times of crisis, socialists, radicals, and other kind of leftists were deemed terrorists. So they can strip you of your name.
I already seen problematic language in here just looking at this, because it said from people suspected of terrorism offenses, right? So
Right.
once again, that to me, that's immediately red flags, right? Because there are people who are protesting against our police state that are still in custody because they got charged with domestic terrorism. I'm talking about a lot of Black Lives Matter protesters. So like, who are the arbiters of this, right? But
don't think it will happen to white people. It won't. Seriously, believe me, that stuff will not happen to white people in Europe. Okay, we can try and be. I understand. Malik says, "Hey, listen, guys. If your grandmother is from Ireland or your granddad is from Germany, it can happen to you." Forget it, man. That won't happen in European white supremacist culture. You know what I mean? But I get what you mean. But it always frustrates me as a Dutch person that once it happens to the UK or the US, like it becomes big news. But this stuff has been brewing already for a long, long time, and that's why I hate that my country is always like escaping the blame. Just like when we talk about colonialism, we always talk about the British Empire, ignoring the fact that the first world colonial empire were the Dutch, who introduced the slave trade, who introduced capitalism, who introduced the first transnational corporations that owned people, that shipped slaves, and that is always so frustrating, because this is not a Anglo-Saxon problem. I have the same with one of my favorite authors. Somebody in the comments talked about that in the beginning. I love that author. I have here a pile of his books, of Gerald Horne. And Gerald Horne is such an amazing writer when it comes to white supremacy and how that came up in Europe and stuff. But even somebody like Gerald Horne often gravitates towards the English-speaking world, as if that is that core of white supremacy, slavery, and so forth. No. It's a complete Western problem, and it was not even rooted. I think it was not even originally coming from the Brits, in the English-speaking world. I mean, we can talk about the Portuguese, the Spanish, the Dutch, the Belgians. You know what I mean? And I always, like I said, it frustrates me that now it becomes big news. We had this stuff for years already, people being stripped of their nationality in countries like the Netherlands and in Belgium and stuff. But I'm glad we are finally talking about that. And like Malik, seriously, we need to more join hands in Europe as well, across borders, because within our countries, allies are, like I said, few and far between. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So we can get Malik in here. Or Josan, do you want to continue the conversation with Malik? I know I got to head out in a few minutes.
I forbid you to head out.
I just got done from Muay Thai too, so I'm literally not even 100% here.
Use your power.
So, are you guys gonna continue? Okay, so I'm actually gonna head out. I'll let you guys continue the conversation from there, but I'll pass it to Malik. But by the way, tomorrow I'll be joining Sabby Sabs with Garland Nixon. That's gonna be very interesting because Sabby and Garland had a great conversation about how you market what I would call Black liberation. They had a discussion about defund the police, and I actually think Garland Nixon has a very nuanced take on defund the police that you would think is an opposition to me, but after hearing him out, I'm looking forward to our conversation tomorrow. I think it's gonna be fun. So that's what we're gonna be doing tomorrow. But make sure you stay tuned here. I look forward to watching the conversation. But I'll pass it back to you, Josana. Take care, guys.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for being here. Malik, your thoughts on what Kieran said?
Yeah, honestly, I think great things there. In terms of the need for allies in Europe, I think for me the bigger thing is that we are minorities. You know what I mean? We're minorities in the most extreme sense of it. In the UK, Black people are just 3% of the population. I never realized how white this country was until I left London and went to other cities, and then whoa, for such a long period of time, I could go months without seeing another person of color, and it was a very weird experience, realizing that actually we are such a minority in this country. In London, where I grew up, diverse communities tend to stick together, and I see why. Because when you go to other places that are overwhelmingly white, you experience the worst forms of racism. I lived in London for 16 years, never had any racism. That's not to say that it doesn't exist in London, because obviously it does. And, we still have issues. We still face disproportionate stop and search from police officers. But I was never called a racial slur. I was never punched by a racist. I never had the more violent, overt forms of racism until I left London and actually discovered England. So yeah, in terms of why we need white allies, it's because we are such people of color. We are such a minority here, numerically we are small. That's something that I've always been jealous of, America, because I guess there is a community of African Americans. There is a community of people of color. You do have a strength in numbers. I mean, you're still a minority in America, but you're not as much of a minority, I guess, as you are in the UK, where it feels like I said, I can go months without seeing another person of color. It's a difficult experience to go through, if I'm honest. A few points I wanted to just respond to. So Josanna, what you said about the bill pushing back migrants, I think that bill is so horrifying because it makes it legal. It gives border force agents immunity if they cause deaths at sea, if they cause migrant deaths. Immunity. That's basically giving them the green light to kill. Let's be real, right? That should never be happening anywhere in the world, let alone a democracy, a Western democracy. The West loves to pride itself upon being, the champion of human rights and, liberal values. But how can you have a country where you're literally allowing your border force agents to kill? You are literally saying if you cause the death of migrants, sorry, not migrants. I'm used. We hear migrants all the time on the news. All news, like news outlets, they refer to them as migrants. They're not migrants. They're refugees. Let's refer to them as what they actually are: refugees, not migrants. So if you cause the death of a refugee, you will not face any time in jail. You will not face any arrest, any charges. For me, that's just absurd. It's unbelievable. It's ridiculous. It is fascism. It is full-blown fascism. And I said
And
this.
Malik, if I can quickly jump in,
go
and
for it.
the reverse is also true. If you help migrants on the sea, if you help them, you get jail time. Like seriously,
There
you
we
get
go.
jail time in multiple European countries if you help immigrants who are drowning on the sea. It's shocking.
It is, and I think just to speak to your point about looking at it from the European lens rather than just the Anglo-Saxon lens, that's something that I noticed, right? I remember in 2016, when you had like the European migrant crisis, as they call it. I hate that word, but refugee crisis. I saw pictures and videos of Italian ships, pushing back boats of refugees, people drowning in the Mediterranean, slave camps in Libya. All of this violence was happening in Europe long before it happened here. Now the English Channel is like the latest scene of attention, and now English people care. Before, when it was happening in the Mediterranean, no one cared. No one cared. The media reported on it, but no one, advocated actually doing something about it, actually pushing for a policy or any sort of change to save these lives. Now it's the opposite. They want to criminalize the RNLI, which is the Royal National Lifeboats Institution. I don't know what the acronym is, but they're the ones who save people at sea. They're going to be criminalized, as you said. People who help refugees are going to be criminalized. So it's very scary. It's a very scary situation here. And just to add one more thing to it, the same bill also allows the police to remove gypsies, Romani, and traveler communities from anywhere that they are, right? So these are communities who they travel a lot. Like that's in their lifestyle, that's in their culture, their tradition, their heritage. And so often they go to, like, let's say parks or like certain totally unused green spaces. But rich landowners don't want them there because they're racist, and they just don't care for them, right? So now it's legal for the police to violently remove them from whatever land that they may be on, even legally, right? Even legal land that they own. Which it's shocking. It's really shocking. I don't know what to say about it other than to just fear.
And it's funny to see how you both pointed out the difference. So you are rewarded if you kill a refugee, but if you help a refugee, and I like the use of the word refugee too, because like it's a refugee. The people that walk through the border with Mexico in Texas, they are refugees. The people that are walking through the border with Canada, they are refugees. These are not migrants. These are not the people that are coming to steal your jobs or bringing drugs or no. Or like, who is bringing drugs in is your own government and big pharma. The opioid crisis didn't happen because somebody from Colombia brought in opium or somebody from East Europe. No. It happened because of the creation of one single medicine by Big Pharma. So it's important. The reason why we do this, the reason why we have this channel, and the reason why we do this kind of segments is to like unravel it. It's open your mind and try to wash away propaganda and white supremacy from your brain. Because the way it works is that for you to not have critical thinking. Because if all of us in this chat and here in this video had critical thinking, these things that happen wouldn't be flying right now. They wouldn't be happening. And that's why I get so desperate, because sometimes I watch the things that fly here in the US, the acts of the government, the police. And I'm like, but like, how? How? How can one pay taxes and do not have healthcare, education, housing, and food? These are basic human rights. And you pay taxes because you are investing in your country so you can have these services back. This is not even a socialist concept. This is a capitalist concept. I'm going to work. I'm going to make, I don't know, let's get a number, $30,000 a year. 10% of that, I'm going to invest so I can have services back. This country has zero basic human rights. And people want to be like, yeah, but you're talking about race and not talking about class. People want to fight amongst them and let the enemy laugh at their faces. It's really freaking upsetting and tiring as a foreigner, as a fighter, to watch that. And when you bring from the UK is is the mother of the US system, right? And it's important to see, what did capitalism and white supremacy did so well? Why do you have no allies in Europe, Kareem and Malik? It's because it created the individualism, but in the opposite way. It creates the fake individualism and makes us the people, the human of the masses. Because the human of the masses believes itself to be an individual, but their brains is completely commended, if that's not a word, is not a proper word, please correct me, by propaganda and by the government, into thinking you have your freedom because you work. You turn the hamster wheel every day so you can buy stuff. That's your freedom. So you can have the sense of winning when you get the job promotion, when you get the job promotion over Joe. So you can work more hours. So you make money that you're not going to even use it because you're going to die soon. Because we're going to use you. We're going to use your energy. But those things, they seem so like, right? I sound like a hippie. I probably sound like a crazy hippie bitch. But yeah. Sorry.
No, very good points. And you know, I think we don't realize how a sense of common humanity and communalism is systematically being destroyed since we grow up. I mean, it starts in school where you have to compete for the best grades. It goes to the job market where you have to compete for the best jobs. It's within your job where you have to compete with your colleagues to get a promotion. And it's to such an extent, I've noticed, that when you do show common humanity, you're demonized. You're demonized. If you try to help immigrant, or I should also say refugees on the sea, you are being demonized, and you can even get jail time. You know what I mean? And it's the same with we had politicians in the Netherlands. I remember during the Bush's war on terror, like the Muslim community in the Netherlands was very scared, and we had a politician back in the day who said, you know what, I'm going to visit I'm going to visit some Muslim families in Amsterdam and in Rotterdam and other big cities, and just visit them and chat with them. That was in the days that, you know, like you still had these kind of politicians that try to build some bridges, and the demonization that these kind of politicians got, like, oh, he's a Muslim hugger, he's a tea drinker, and you'll be amazed how many people find that normal to bash common humanity with other human beings. And I saw you have a case in the UK as well, and probably Malik is more aware of this. You have this professional football player who is what is he doing? He's giving food to young children.
Yeah.
Right. And that the amount of vitriol he gets for just helping poor kids. That's the kind of world we live in. That's that neoliberal capital competitive world that we live in. And when you add racialization, you start that competition between so-called ethnic and racial groups. It's shocking. But maybe you can tell the audience a bit about that case, Malika. I'm not too familiar.
Yeah, no, definitely. Marcus Rashford he gets so much abuse on Twitter, for basically wanting to feed kids. People. I remember this one comment saying, "Focus on football, not politics." When did feeding kids become politics? When did that basic act of humanity become politics? Right?
So
That should not be,
can you
right?
tell us a bit what he does for those people who just don't even know who he is?
Yeah, he's a Man United footballer, but on the side, like beyond football, he does lots of charitable work. So there's two main things. One is free school meals. So we have a government program called Free School Meals, where if you grow up in a poor family, you get free food at school, right? You can eat lunch for free at school. This was so that kids don't starve, and I benefited from that when I was a kid too. If I didn't have that, I wouldn't have been able to eat at school, full stop. I know many people who just still didn't eat because their parents didn't, you have to apply, you have to do the admin. Many people just didn't eat. These are children not eating in school in the UK. Sounds surprising, but that's the reality. So Marcus Rashford fought to save this policy. He fought to make sure that it was actually being enacted properly. And I'll find some pictures, but basically the government outsourced it to a private company to deal with it. That's always the beginning of the end for anything. Whenever the government privatizes or outsources anything, because these companies are only motivated by profit. At the end of the day, they want to make as much money as possible. So I'll find a picture, but this woman, for her two children, was given something like two bananas, like a loaf of bread, like an orange. It was a joke. You couldn't make even 2 days worth of food out of it. Yet she was expected to make it last for a week for both of her children. And this is the thing that Marcus Rashford fought to end. He fought to make sure that free school meals was being provided properly. Right, people were given proper nutrition, proper food, proper meals, and more importantly, during the holidays too. Because when you have the Christmas and summer holidays, you don't have free school meals anymore because you're not going to school, right? But children still need to eat, right? Even if they're going to school or not, they still need to eat. So he pushed to make sure that the government helps provide families with vouchers or food packages so that their kids could eat. That was a big thing that he pushed for, and he was trolled for it. He received racial abuse, criticized all over social media. The other thing that he's done is a Christmas package so that poor families can afford to cook a Christmas meal for their family for just £10. I think that's another important thing, right? Because we live in a society where you've got advertising, you've got TV, media, everything, and everyone says you need to buy your kids presents for Christmas. You need to cook a nice big Christmas meal, even if you're not Christian. I'm not Christian yet. My family was still pressurized to get involved in this. When I told my friends that I don't celebrate Christmas, they were just like shocked. But he fought to make that affordable for poor families, so that they could afford to partake in this tradition for just £10. So yeah, those are the two biggest things that he's done, and he's been given an MBE. I'm sorry, made a member of the British Empire, which I've got my own opinions on that. But the point is, he's been recognized for his good deeds. He's been recognized for his charitable services, but he still gets racial abuse for it on the side.
Yeah, and also I saw that even conservative politicians are attacking him for it, right? In the UK. Yeah. Shocking stuff.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, our politicians are clowns here. Like earlier, someone said about how the establishment are smart. I think Nick said this. The establishment are smart, right? They know what they're doing. Everything's calculated. It's the same thing in the UK with Boris. He's our version of Trump, right? He even looks like him. And you see a lot of photos and videos about him doing stupid, like, just funny things, right? Makes him look like a clown. But all of this draconian legislation that we've discussed today, this is under his government. This is under Boris. So he may try to present himself as a clown, but he knows what he's doing. Everyone around him knows what they're doing, and it's dangerous. It's dangerous for us to dismiss him as a clown, because he's not. He's a very smart man, and a very dangerously smart man.
I just wanted to ask you guys before we wrap up, and Karim, please come up. But also because Jane asked in very good faith if the Workers' Party is not fighting against this bill. I would like the both of you to explain that the Workers' Party is not that what it used to be, right? It's so if Karim can get to his point and then like go back to this Workers'.
Yeah, I think I heard it on who said that? Either it was George Monbiot or it was Aaron Bastani of Novara Media. I'm not sure who said that that even the buffoonishness of Boris Johnson is calculated. You know, he plays the clown, he plays the buffoon, and everybody's like, "Oh, look at our funny prime minister." You know, but at the same time, he implements the most horrible policies. You know what I mean? So that these are often very smart, like characters these politicians play. And about what you said about the Labour Party, so Labour in the UK is very, and I can almost say too comparable to Dutch Labour. It's completely similar. We have the anti-Semitism rows in Dutch Labour, just like you guys. We have that Labour is predominantly white and has a very bad track record to defending discriminated non-white minority groups such as Black people. So the left Labour is not really like the Democrats in the US, because the Democrats in the US still abuse that kind of racism and sexism as something that they want to, how can I say that? They want to show that they are not sexist and not racist. Of course, they won't touch structural racism and structural sexism, but they will talk about, oh, you cannot say this word and you cannot say that word. So they pretend that they are anti-racist and anti-sexist in the US. That is what the Democrats still seem to do a little bit. But the Labour in Europe is like they actively don't want to align themselves with anti-racist movements. They're ashamed of it. Like you have Keir Starmer in the UK, who just doesn't want to touch issues of anti-black racism, Islamophobia, issues of what was it again I saw last time with Keir Starmer? Well, there was this. Well, we talked about it. There was this lady that was bullied. Remember in the show we talked last time, Josanna, about European racism, Orientalism. There was this Labour MP, 28 years old young lady, I think, who was bullied, Islamophobic, death threats. She's bullied day to day. Keir Starmer has not come out to defend her or to give her some words of support. That is our left. That is our white left in Europe, or at least Northwestern Europe. Is that it's leftist in a sense, but I don't even know what's left anymore, because they're hardcore neoliberal. They support neoliberal policies. They will sometimes talk a bit leftist when it supports the majority group, but they are actively distancing themselves from anything anti-racist, because they're just afraid of the vitriol they will get of people who just find anti-racism something very bad or something. I don't know. Malik, do you see the same things happening in the UK?
Yeah, you're spot on. It's exactly that. It is exactly that, and it's a great shame. You know, we don't have a left. We've never had a left, really, I'd say. I mean, looking at the Afghanistan war and the Iraq war, the votes for it, Labour voted in favor. The majority of Labour MPs voted in favor of going to war in Afghanistan and Iraq. And even the person said to be the greatest Labour Prime Minister of all time, Clement Attlee, he was the Prime Minister after World War II, and it was under his government that we created the NHS, the National Health Service, which is free healthcare. People love him, right? But he was also the Prime Minister who saw the country deploy troops to Malaysia, right, under the Malaysian emergency, something like that. But yeah, he was an imperialist, you know, and every Labour Prime Minister that we've ever had has also been an imperialist. We have never, ever, ever had an anti-imperialist Labour Prime Minister. We've had an anti-imperialist Labour leader in Jeremy Corbyn, But you you see what happened to him, right? I mean, he was called a terrorist because I think there's a photo of him like shaking hands with Hamas, and speaking to the IRA, and it's this. I don't get it. I don't get it. Like, we can't even speak to these groups who are seen as terrorists. Like, the British public doesn't consider that maybe the IRA or Hamas had a reason to pick up arms. Maybe they were, you know what I mean? Like, they don't realize that these groups who we dismiss as terrorists aren't actually terrorists, right? They're terrorists if you're a white colonial settler. But for the people living there, right, these people are heroes. They're freedom fighters. These situations are so much more nuanced than the British public recognizes. So unfortunately, if you're anywhere near these people, you're a terrorist, and that's why Jeremy Corbyn received a lot of slack from the media. Jeremy Corbyn voted against the Afghanistan war and the Iraq war, right? So if you look at his record, he has always been against imperialism. He's always been against austerity, which is like the cutting back of public services and social welfare. He's always been in the right place for me. As a leftist in the UK, he is the one politician who I can actually say I trust. You know what I mean? He's the one politician who I can say I trust, and yet he was just destroyed. He was assassinated by the media, like in an intense campaign of character assassination. And right now he's been removed by the Labour Party. They have removed the whip, meaning that he doesn't represent the Labour Party. And if there was a election today, Labour would run their own candidate in his constituency. He has to vote as an independent MP because they don't want him in the Labour Party anymore. And so this is the state of the Labour Party. It's always been that way since Tony Blair. He kind of began this, I call it red conservatism. Because really the Labour Party is no different from the Conservatives. Looking at their votes, like I said, they voted in favour of Iraq, they voted in favour of Afghanistan. Many of their votes have been in line with conservative values or neoliberal values. Some people even say that Tony Blair was the greatest successor to Margaret Thatcher. That's how conservative this guy was, and this is the Labour Party. I'm not a part of it anymore. Because they have gotten rid of entire groups, like socialist groups. They've literally kicked them out of the party. And the Labour Party, which was once the biggest socialist party in Europe, is now struggling for funds because we've just all left. Leftists and people of color like myself, we have left the party because this is not a party for us. This is not a party that represents our views. This is a party that remains silent when stuff like the Nationality and Borders Bill went by. In fact, if you go on Keir Starmer's page, he's the leader of the Labour Party. He did a video on GB News, which is, if you don't know GB News, and they're like our racist Fox News channel. He did an interview there, and he mentioned patriotism. It's our patriotic duty, this and that, and he's in favor of like standing behind like the British flag and all of this, like, you know what I mean? This patriotism, this flag shagging, this, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, and it's like it actually sickens me a bit. You know what I mean? Like, these people love a flag more than they do actual human beings. They would, like, if a British flag was in the ocean and a refugee was drowning, they would save the flag and not the refugee. That's how messed up these people are. So yeah, I don't deal with the Labour Party anymore. It's not a party for socialists. It's not a party if you're left wing. If you're centre left or if you're liberal, it's the best place for you. But otherwise, it's just not a socialist party anymore.
Yeah, and if you have it's already a contradiction in terms. If you already have a Labour Party, and it's already become normal to say the Labour left and the Labour right, what kind of political party do you have if you have the right and the left within one party? You're not you're especially not a socialist party. You know what I mean? And what you say as well is again like a huge parallel with us in the Netherlands. Of course, we're neighbors. We have a little bit of water in between, but we're very close. And that is the fact that in the Netherlands also the left Labour Party just they cannot stand up for minority groups. And in the Netherlands, and probably you will start seeing that more and more in the UK as well, because I see the same kind of pattern with you guys, is that minority groups or minority politicians of color will step out of the parties. That's what happened in the Netherlands. And they have organized and created their own political parties. So you have a party where Dutch descendants of slaves, for example, created their own party run by an amazing black woman. We have another party that is more organized by people, Muslims of Muslim backgrounds. And they're actually doing pretty good in the polls because they were all originally part of the traditional left parties in the Netherlands, but they just gave up. Like, you can say and do what you want, they will not help you. And if you say something that goes against the grain, like, for example, I stand for the Palestinian people, or I want to help the Palestinian people, you're kicked out. It's very simple. You're booted out of the party. You know what I mean? Because you're a so-called anti-Semite. So I see a kind of the same trajectory in the UK. So I will be following it. I'm very curious what will happen, especially with these politicians coming from minority groups who are still fighting for the Labour Party. I'm very curious what will happen with them.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your contribution tonight. Before we wrap up, I would like to hear some goodbye, last words from Malik. What would you like to promote? And I will also share this screen and show the petition that can be signed only if you are in the UK, right?
Yeah. You have to be UK resident for it to count. But I mean, yeah. But you can still sign it. It's just later that signature won't count. But I guess it would beef up the numbers, and that's a positive show. So yeah, please do share that petition. And like, if
I can
promote
there, because that's my first time doing it.
That's it, exactly. Yeah. And clause 9 is the particular clause of the Nationality and Borders Bill that will allow for our citizenship to be revoked without any notice and without any right to appeal. So that's a particular clause that they're going for. It's very well targeted, which I like.
So I see here, Parliament considers all petitions that get more than 100,000 signatures for debate, and amazingly, 260,348 signatures.
Yeah.
I will be sharing that link on my Twitter. So if you follow me, please go ahead. I want to stop sharing. Boom. If you follow me, please share and sign. Let's get, the revolution has to be worldwide. And this is one of the reasons why we are doing the segment, right, Kareem?
Yeah, absolutely. We need to join hands, and I'm glad to have met Malik. We definitely stay in touch. We seem to have a lot in common also in the way we think and our experiences in our neighboring countries. So yeah, great you were here, and of course, always great to see Josana and the rest who has left, of course. But let's keep it going.
100%.
Thank you for being here, Malik. Thank you for being here with me, and to the end, Kareem. Yay! We resisted. Thank you for all of you in the comments, even the trolls, even the people that are trolling, because we kind of need you for the other point of view. Please subscribe to Kareem's YouTube channel, Betty Beat Media. Also in Twitter. Malik is also on Twitter, right? It's Malik1, the number 1.
Yeah, instead of an L, it's just the number 1.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Malik. So instead of the L, the number 1, if you can follow him on Twitter. Subscribe, please subscribe and share and like the videos for RBN. We just changed our name. We need your support to grow and keep on blacking out white supremacist and capitalist propaganda out of our heads and bloods and veins. And hopefully, with all these conversations, we will grow into the world we truly desire to see. Thank you so much for being with us. We're signing out. Have a good night, y'all. Boa noite, as we say in Brazil.